The U.S. men's national team has never had a more important cycle than 2026. They made a splash hiring in Mauricio Pochettino to elevate this team beyond what they accomplished under Greg Berhalter. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to MLS Moves. Please make sure you like this video down below. Let's get to 300 likes. We got to 200 on our last video, which was our goal. Let's hit 300 on this one. Also, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that little bell notification so you never miss a video. I brought back Alexi, Lalas, and Filippo Silva to talk about the U.S. men's national team's realistic goals for 2026 and what would be considered a failure. I also asked them who they thought was the best player in U.S. men's national team history. Now, on to the video. Well, we have two of my friends back again. Yes, they did not kill each other the last episode. I think that we've actually mended fences. I think that they are on good terms. Today, we're going to talk about...
Well, I think a lot of the thing is blown out of proportion. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm just, yes. Yeah. Look, when I was talking to both of you guys about doing this, I heard both respect on both sides. No ill will or any type of harsh feelings. So I do think that social media has obviously blown it out of proportion. All jokes aside, good conversation. We're going to continue this today with the USMNT, both of your strong suits more, I would say. And we'll start off with one thing that Pochettino has recently said, because we just recently did an MLS video. He recently said that it didn't matter where a player played. And I think he was alluding to them, just it's all about the form, not with the quality of league or where you're playing at. So we'll start off with Alexi first. What was your opinion on Pochettino saying that? And are you really surprised that that's the philosophy he's carrying into his USMNT tenure?
He's a smart guy, Pochettino. I think he will have either he knows or he will have been told about what has happened in the past and the dynamic between U.S. soccer and the U.S. men's national team and Major League Soccer, and some of the stuff that has gone on in the past, whether it's with Klinsmann or Berhalter or anybody else for that matter. And I don't think it doesn't change anything or hurt him to say something like that. But saying it and doing it are two different things. And the reality is, where is that talent when it comes to players in MLS, American players with an American passport that actually are eligible, that are going to make a difference? We are in a very, very different time than, you go all the way back, obviously, to my time, and then, the 2002 World Cup team, and, your Eddie Popes and your Frankie Haydicks, and then obviously Landon Donovans and DeMarcus Beasley's, these MLS players that not only were good enough to make the team, but were stars on the team. That doesn't happen a lot anymore. Some would argue that's a good thing. Some would argue that's a bad thing from an MLS perspective. I'm not saying that there isn't talent out there, but him blanketing it out and saying, I don't care where you play, I think it's good because it sends the right message. But I don't know how it's going to translate into him bringing any more or less of the MLS talent that exists in this moment for the national team.
Yeah, Mike. Filippo, what's your response to that? Do you think that was just wordplay? Do you think he was just saying that? Or do you think he's actually, like, if Diego Luna just turns it up and he starts, I don't know, he has 20 goals and 10 assists in MLS in 2025. Now, to be fair, if he does that, he probably will be on Europe. He probably won't be sticking around in Major League Soccer. But if he did stick around MLS, how do you think he would actually abide by what he just said? And would Diego Luna have a spot in USMNT?
Well, you just mentioned the winger scoring 20 goals and 10 assists in MLS. If you're doing that, then you're probably going to the U.S. national team. I think he has to say that, because if you're playing whatever league you are, he can't just, Messi plays in MLS. Would he not be in our national team if because he's in MLS? The difference is, like, depending on where you play, you have to be more or less dominant. So, for example, if you are a Real Madrid backup and you come off the bench and you look about the same level as the backups at Real Madrid, you're probably good enough to make the U.S. national team. Now, for MLS, the standard probably is you have to be one of the best players in your position or drop 20 goals in the season, right? And to Alexi's point about the Americans in MLS, that's a big issue. And last year in November, I went to Japan. And when I was in Japan, I wanted to go to a game. I wanted to watch the J League up close, even to compare a little bit to MLS, because Japan is on the rise. And one thing I noticed about the J League, when I was watching the game, I thought there was an advantage for MLS. There's better quality players in MLS with the DPs. If you remove the DPs, I think MLS and the J League are very close. One of those where maybe MLS is a bit ahead, but it wouldn't really matter. It's like very close. But the difference with the J League is most of the players are Japanese. So what does that mean? Like, in that sense, when you get a Japanese player in the national team, the best players in their league are Japanese. In MLS, the best players are not American right now. They're mostly foreigners. Not just Messi, right? Well, he just left. Like Cucho Hernandez was another one that we can mention. Many of the players, most of the players now, Chucky Lozano with San Diego, the best players in MLS are not American right now. So when it comes to that, when you compare to the players playing in Europe right now, the Americans, there is a talent gap. So unless Diego Luna is dropping 20 goals in MLS, players like Gio Reyna, even off the bench with Dortmund, have an advantage. They're playing tougher competition and playing for a tougher team, right? Because who's to say if Luna can drop 15 goals one season in MLS, maybe Gio Reyna off the bench in Dortmund can come to MLS and also do the same. Maybe, right? We don't know. So where the player plays absolutely matters. And let's be real, Pochettino knows that, because I think Alexi kind of said that. It's like watch what he does, not what he says. If you look at he had 2 rosters, right? Besides the January one, October and November, we had an injury crisis in October, and he still only brought MLS goalkeepers, which is a position that we suck in Europe right now. So it makes sense. And I think the other ones were Miles Robinson and I think Tim Ream. So Tim Ream is a veteran that's been there for a while. It makes sense. And Miles has always been that center back that's in and out of the roster, right? Even with Berhalter. That's all he brought. So again, where is this thing about leagues not matter? Because he had the chance to bring the MLS players in that camp where he wouldn't even been heavily criticized there because there were so many injuries. We had like 15 injuries in Europe, something like that. And he still didn't bring them. So we'll see March. The roster comes out, I think, around when this episode's coming out. We're going to get a lot of like data on Pochettino there. But if that roster comes up and he has like Ream, Miles, and like 2 goalkeepers, then like, dude, you clearly don't rate MLS. It clearly does matter where he plays.
But he might rate MLS, and it just might be one of the moments right now where MLS is not producing American players. I would push back a little bit on just because you are on the books of a team and you're training every day, and you mentioned Real Madrid. We've had it in the past where players are eligible for the men's national team and they're at a big club, but they're either not playing at all or they're playing very, 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 very little. It doesn't necessarily mean now. I will agree that you get the benefit of the doubt because of the cachet that comes with the association of these big clubs. But then, the whistle blows and you got to get on the field, and you might be coming into a very, very different situation and circumstance where it doesn't always translate. And just because you are training day in and day out at one of these big clubs doesn't necessarily mean that you are any better than anybody else that is playing day in and day out. I completely agree that if you're not playing in MLS and you're not playing at Real Madrid, the balance there is going to be way off. But if you're not playing at Real Madrid and you are an American starring in MLS, I think the balance comes right back up. And there's nothing to say that you as an MLS player, if and when you're called in, can't be better than that player who is on the books of a big club team, in this case Real Madrid or anybody else.
Yeah, I meant more like a player, let's say like Brahim Diaz for Real Madrid, right? He comes off the bench and is still effective. He's obviously worse than the Vinicius, the Rodrigos, but he comes off the bench and he's getting, I don't know, maybe 5 goals, 5 assists in a season. So you could see that. But yeah, if you're just sitting on the bench at Real Madrid and you don't see a single minute all season long, you can get the benefit of the doubt, of course, because the Real Madrid scouts saw something in you, right? They could be wrong. A lot of the professional scouts are wrong too. They don't always get it right. Mm-hmm. But absolutely, yeah. The problem is, ultimately, when it comes to that, is we don't have an American dominating MLS. Sure. That is.
But I'm just saying, someone like Zendejas or something like that, who, from a club perspective, we're like, oh my God, this is great. Well, we really want this and we need this. And it doesn't always translate when you come into the national team, whether you're playing in MLS or any place else for that matter. I just wanted to, make that
His
point.
league is not that much better than MLS. It might not even be, right?
Right.
Zendejas, yeah, for example. But yeah, it also, it's very tricky because it has to be case by case. Like, for example, Gio Reyna. We have seen him play well for the national team many times. So does he get an extra life or two because of that? It's like, hey, because like for example, if you go based on just club form, Colombia wouldn't call up James Rodriguez, and then he comes in and he's like the best 10 in Copa America out of nowhere, right? So it has to be on a case by case. But of course, if you're an American MLS and you're not dominating, you're not being one of the best players, it's going to be hard to get an opportunity. That is the problem. You're not going to get an opportunity.
Yep.
You're muted, Will. Yeah, you're muted.
Here we go. Here we go. Sorry, I think my mix amp messed up for a minute. But Gio Reyna is a good example because there were a lot of people, including myself, were just talking about the possibility of him coming here on a short-term loan for 6 months in the beginning of the MLS season because he wasn't playing regularly at Dortmund at the time. Ricky Puig had been injured. He was going to be out for half the year. Not anybody saying, hey, come here permanently because he is, 21, 22 years old still, a lot of potential. Nobody's saying come over here now. But even if he did, right, you brought up a point about none of our best players play in MLS. No domestic player is here and is thriving or is elite, right, or to the league standard. I don't think our national team lets them do that because anytime they're even remotely decent, they're like, hey, get that guy to Europe now. Don't let him stay. Ricardo Pepi scored 18 goals for Dallas in 2022, and he immediately moved to, was it Augsburg, I think?
But they paid a lot, yeah. They
played a lot. He immediately moved. But if Pepi had stayed, let's just say 2 extra years, Alexi, we'll say this. If Pepi had stayed following that great season, would he probably not have continued his run and dominate MLS? Because I think he did score 18 goals in his when he was like 19 years old.
It was like 13. It was less. But
was it 13? Okay, 13.
I think Jesus had more the season, but Pepe was like 12 or 13. But he did well.
12 or 13. But he was like 19 years old. You saw the promise. It is the reason why we're not seeing. I mean, they're not even getting a chance to really stay here. They
have a chance. They don't have to sign the contract. They can certainly stay here. I think that they see opportunity both on and off the field, opportunity when it comes to making money, opportunity when it comes to increasing their profile. And yes, from a competitive perspective, I think a lot of them look at it as, Europe is the be all and end all. Look, if you want to go to Europe, there are flights leaving every hour on the hour from LAX to JFK and everywhere in between. But going to the right place that is going to help you progress and to get better as a soccer player and adjust and be able to accommodate the other 22 and a half hours of the day that you're not playing a soccer game. That's a completely different thing. The question, you mentioned Gio Reyna. What if Gio Reyna decided to come back to Major League Soccer? And not on a short time basis. What if for the next 10 years, Gio Reyna came back, starred in Major League Soccer, and was a part of the national team? There would absolutely be a segment of the U.S. men's national team fan base out there and beyond that would look at him in the same way that they kind of look at Landon Donovan, in that he's settled, in that as good as he is, he could have been so much better. And I don't think that that's fair to the player. I don't think that it's fair to Major League Soccer in this case, although it could be USL or any place else out there, in terms of getting the best version of these players, which is what we ultimately all want. That best version can occur in many, many different places. It doesn't necessarily have to be Europe.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it's like walking a fine line, right? There are USMNT fans who don't want any of our players, Pulisic, McKinney, Reyna, coming back to MLS right now. They want to wait until they're in the twilight of their career. But if MLS wants, and we did a video about this, to make that jump, eventually those guys are going to have to come here.
But why do USMNT fans not want that? I think that's what we need to address real quick, right? Just
why USMNT fans don't want these players to come back to Major League Soccer?
Besides the portion of the fan base that just despises MLS, what is the rational take behind it?
Well, I would say that they believe that they're not going to get the same quality of play, that it's going to make them not reach their potential, that if they have a bad run of form, that they're just washed and they don't belong anywhere near the USMNT. But to Alexi's point,
but actually, it comes down what I said this in the previous episode when we talked about MLS. When we failed to qualify to the World Cup and we brought back Clint and everyone, there was a very big perception and blame that the fan base put on MLS. He's like, you're bringing our star players back. They're dropping the level. Again, whether it's fair or not, that is part of the perception. And I mean, yeah, like Pulisic comes to MLS tomorrow. He's still Pulisic. He's not going to magically get worse. the theory behind it is that in Europe, you can, like in MLS, Pulisic, wherever team he goes, he's a lock to start, like for a foreseeable future. But you see in Europe, like at least not in, I'm going to change the word Europe. I'm going to talk Milan because I'm going to talk about clubs, because Europe, he's not playing San Marino or Liechtenstein or whatever, right? Because those leagues will lose to USL. But when you're in a club like that, it's not even pressure from the media fan base. I'm not even talking about that. It's just if he has a drop in form, his starting spot is at risk, right? As always. While in MLS, that leash would be a lot longer for him. American player, he might even not drop the form as much, right? It's a little bit easier for him, bigger salary, so more money spent, marketable player, which I get. And that does happen also in big European leagues. Some players get a longer leash, but it would happen much more here to him. There is a probability that certain guys, McKennie is one that I would get worried about more specifically, could get complacent. Because you see McKennie every year. He gains weight. They try to kick him out of Juventus. He randomly loses weight and he's back at it. And then he gains weight again or just gets complacent. So some players need to be always with someone pressuring them.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on the situation of the U.S., being a DP, it could happen that some players could slack off. That's what concerns a lot of the fans. Some players won't drop off. They will be at their best because they take care of themselves and they're sharp and they understand that. But it's not the case for all of them.
So do you think that Landon Donovan, who is arguably the best male U.S. player in history, do you think that we got the best version of him? Or do you think it could have been better had he stuck it out, quote unquote, and continued on? Because you know as well as I do that if Christian Pulisic were to come back and were to lose a ball immediately, it's because of MLS. If Christian Pulisic were to come back and, you know, the U.S. team failed to qualify, like you mentioned, it's all going to be blamed on MLS. I think MLS is often a convenient, and I'm not saying at times it's not fair, but I think it's also a convenient way to put all of our insecurities and all of our inferiority complex and lump it onto MLS's fault as to why we haven't done X, Y, or Z.
Of course, like whatever I say about Landon and whatever you say, anyone says, like, was that the best version of Landon? It's all speculation. We don't know. We'll never know, right? I do think that if Landon did, because Landon could have played in top European leagues. We all know that. He could have if he wanted to. I do think possibly we would have seen a bit of a better version of Landon Donovan over time if he stayed there for long enough. Because that's the thing. People talk about Landon, and of course he could have played. I mean, we've seen it when he played. He held his own in every level there. He sometimes even performed very well. He could have stayed there and played. Not for Bayern Munich, right? Maybe not Liverpool, but easily could have played for a mid-table team, possibly Continent. We've seen Clint Dempsey do very well for Fulham. Right. And some people argue that Landon was a higher level than Dempsey. Maybe Dempsey had a different mentality, approach. But from a technical standpoint, Landon was probably a better player. He could have easily played for teams that play in transition. He was deadly in transition. I do think, yes, we would have probably had a better version of Landon, but I can't prove it. I can't really prove it at all. I couldn't do that.
Right, exactly. It's all obviously it's all speculative. I mean, hell, we got a pretty good version of him.
We got a great version. It's very tricky when we talk about that, and it is different. I actually had Jeff Cameron on once, and we talked about that with Landon. And what Jeff said was interesting, and I think he has a valid point. When he was, because we were talking about Landon saying Pulisic should have come to MLS right before the move to Milan, and I think Jeff Cameron's even close friends with Christian Pulisic, I believe, and he was even talking about this, like, the same way Landon has to see this, we have to see this too. Landon talks about this MLS thing all the time because it worked for him. And maybe that was the best version of him. And there are a few players that could work and it could be the best route. I don't think it's the vast majority. I think we can all agree that the tougher competition you face, if you're up for it, that'll push you to become better and better and better, right? I think we can all agree on that. It's not the case for everyone, but for most players, let's say over 70%. And Jeff Cameron was saying the same about Landon. It's like, what people need to understand is that for Landon Donovan, that was probably the best route. And that might have been the best version of Landon. He knew what was better for him. It might have been. But he was talking about Pulisic specifically. And he said for Pulisic, what he wants to achieve, for his motivation, for him to every single day wake up and want to work hard, he has to be in Europe. Because that's what Pulisic wants. That's another thing too. Motivation, right? You need to wake up motivated every day. What do you want, Pulisic? Oh, I want to win the Champions League. I want to compete in the Champions League. If he's in MLS, maybe he won't be as motivated just because of his own career ambitions. Maybe Landon's ambition was to be here in MLS.
No, I agree. And like you said, it's hypothetical. We won't know. I mean, there's not going to be, we're never going to know if he would have been a better version of himself. Like you said, he had stints at Everton where he was successful. And I think they even tried to buy him, and the Galaxy and Bruce Arena rejected those offers, and they didn't allow him to make the move permanent to Everton. But let's move on to another discussion about 2026. Let's talk about Pochettino and talk about the expectations of this team, because obviously, like you said, Filippo, we talked about this. There's not a lot going on with the USMNT, and there's a little bit of disappointment. I think even Pete said he was going to do his top 10 players, and he couldn't even come up with more than 3 guys because of how disappointing the
There's
USMNT
a lot of
is.
injuries too. Yeah,
A lot of injuries. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But we fired Greg Berhalter because what he did was not good enough. And they went and they got a big fish in Pochettino. A lot of people, including myself, didn't even think they would be able to acquire someone like himself. I thought they were going to go the MLS route and probably hire Steve Cherundolo or maybe even Wilfred Nancy, but they hired a big manager who's coached in the top 5 leagues. What are the expectations for Pochettino in the USMNT hosting the World Cup in 2026? Filippo.
You mean like the bare minimum that we should
Yes,
demand?
yeah. Like, well, just investing all this money in a big time coach that this is going to be Pulisic, McKinney, Adams, prime. They're the best they're ever going to be. What are the, and it's at home. What is the bare minimum for success for this national team?
So I've been one of the biggest Greg Berhalter haters, if you guys don't know, right?
You have? No
Yeah,
way.
yeah. You didn't know that?
No.
But
It was Alexi.
But I think it's like it's only fair to hold Pochettino to the same standard or higher. We're going to play at home, and if Greg Berhalter, the standard was at least to make it to the quarterfinals in 2022, which is winning 1 knockout round game. But 2026, it's expanded. So I think the bare minimum with a better team, I think he will have a better team than we had in 2022, and he is on paper a more qualified manager, more qualified coach. To me, we should be demanding for him to win 2 knockout round games and make it to the quarterfinals, which would be the round 32, round 16, and that. Of course, like if we go on and we play, I don't know, Spain, the best team in the world right now would technically be Spain. We get unlucky with the draw. We played them in round 16 and we lose 1-0, whatever. Yeah, I'm not going to say he flopped, but we didn't meet the expectations of what we wanted, right? But again, if he does a good job in the group stage, we should be facing a 2nd or 3rd place team. So it should be a weaker one, and we should still be avoiding. So I do think right now with the data we have, we don't know the bracket. We don't know the groups. So it's entirely speculative. I would say win 2 knockout round games, make it to the quarterfinals. And once we get there, let's see what happens. Because once you get that far, it's 1 game at a time. And on the right day, we play Argentina. DePaul gets a red card in the first 10 minutes. All of a sudden, we have a good shot right there, or Messi gets injured. Get to the quarterfinals, and then let's see what we can do for it. Because I was talking to Eddie Johnson about this, and the one thing with the U.S. national team that would fascinate me, and this is one thing that many people in the world don't understand, unless you've lived in the U.S. for long enough, they won't really understand, is the worst thing they can deal with is get an American team that starts to actually believe they can win this. If they start to believe this is a nasty team to play against, I don't think they believe that right now, the players. They might say it, but I don't think they actually believe it. But the moment you get to a quarterfinals and maybe you knock out one title contender, and then all of a sudden, Tyler Adams, Pulisic, McKinney, Dest, A-Rob, they're like, wait a second, we just beat a team that's a title contender, and we're playing at home. Can we actually win this? It's going to be a completely different team. We saw a very anemic U.S. men's national team side under Berhalter very often. I don't think he had the spirit, or he couldn't really push this team to drive forward of what we needed to see. If Pochettino can get that and get this team to believe, this is a team that can go far and can do something special. But again, to your point, quarterfinals, win 2 knockout round games.
A couple things when it comes to this team. One, this is actually Berhalter's team that you're going to see in its fullest version, okay? While he's not there, this is the team that we kind of were introduced, second youngest team at the Qatar World Cup. The cultivation of this young, oftentimes teenage team now coming into their own in terms of their abilities, obviously in terms of their age, but it's going to be under Pochettino. Pochettino is being paid a lot of money. He is, as you mentioned, a very, very big name. but he doesn't have the international experience. Doesn't matter. All right. Janet Jackson, what have you done for me lately? Ultimately, it's going to be the summer of 2026 when he is going to be judged. I completely agree in terms of, where they want to end up. And once you get into the knockout rounds, then anything can happen. And the soccer gods smile upon you, or they spit upon you in different ways.
You guys beat Colombia, Alexi.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, they were title contenders at that.
Yeah, exactly. So things can happen. Getting out of the group is we've done that plenty of times, as we've talked about before. In 2002, we were possibly a handball away from going to a semifinal. So things can happen. That magic and that belief that you were talking about, that is why he is being paid. He is being paid to make sure that you take all this talent that you have that now is in their prime and make them believe that they can do things that we haven't seen before. And if he can do that, he walks away a legend. This is a short-term type of gig for Pochettino, all right? He's going to go on and do some different things, but he can leave a lasting legacy with the way that this team performs, and specifically because it is in the United States. And I am sitting here in front of you today because of the 94 World Cup, okay? Maybe I would have played in a different World Cup in a different place, but specifically because of what happened in 94 and it being in the U.S., it changed my life forever. And it can change the players, it can change Pochettino, and it certainly can change American soccer, especially because 2026 is a very, very different version of American soccer than way back in the 1900s when I was running around and you guys weren't even born.
Yeah, but to your point, what do you think they expect?
Well, I do need to push back on one thing that he said.
Sure.
One thing.
Okay.
The part that this is Greg Berhalter's team, because most of these players, like when I try to do the brain exercise of doing like a USMNT roster prediction, there are a lot of players that it kind of picks itself, right? Yeah. And regardless of who the coach would have been, and I even think Berhalter made some good calls and he made some really bad calls in the World Cup, for example, of players that he left out that maybe if they would have been as much valuable as some of the vets that he brought, but you would have given them that World Cup experience for a further edition. Because, I mean, you played it. The second World Cup will always be a bit less frightening than the first one you play, like anything in life, right? But to your point, I don't see this as Berhalter's team. The players are America's team. They're American players that most of them would have been there regardless of the coach. Some of the players that Berhalter brought, for example, to the World Cup, they shouldn't have been there, in my opinion. Humble opinion right there. And the team is not playing exactly the way Berhalter did. It's a different team. Obviously, ultimately, we have to see how they perform when it matters. I don't think Pochettino has been tested yet. He'll get tested in March. He'll get tested during the summer. He better bring at least one trophy back because Berhalter did win that, right? The Nations League and Gold Cup. But yeah, I do agree with one thing that you very often said. At the end of the day, we will judge Pochettino based on what he does in the World Cup. Right? If he loses the Nations League and loses the Gold Cup, but then he freaking gets this team to a semifinals in the World Cup, no one will care.
Exactly.
No one will give a crap. But I don't see it as Berhalter's team. We could argue like a dual national here and there that was recruited under him, so you could put that on him and part of the team built. But I see it as the U.S. men's national team, the same way someone that takes over this team after Pochettino, because a lot of these players, they should be around for 2030. They're young enough, right? But it's not Pochettino's team after, regardless of who takes over. It's going to be a different coach. It's going to be a different system, a different
I'm just
ideology.
talking about the personnel. You mentioned it picks itself. I mean, for the most part.
Most part, yes.
But most of those players have been around. So we've seen them. So I'm not saying that they're going to play the same way, but the personnel and the recruiting process, and I have to be fair to Ernie Stewart, who was involved in a lot of that over the years, especially when it comes to the dual nationals and the players that have agreed to play for the US. And that's not a knock on Pochettino by any stretch of the imagination. As a matter of fact, it's his responsibility to take what Berhalter did and make it better. And the reason why Greg Berhalter is not in that position to do it is because he failed and they didn't think that it was heading in that right direction. So Pochettino has been given this valuable gift, is not the right word, but this valuable team, and it's up to him to coach them up and make them better. And maybe he can do it better than Greg Berhalter in the terms of the direction.
Just so I understand, maybe I misunderstood what you said. What did you mean when you said Berhalter's team? You mean like the players were the same? That's what you meant?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, yeah. In that sense, yeah, that's not really debatable. I thought you meant like Berhalter built this team and handed it to Pochettino, which that's what I don't agree with. Yeah, the players were players that Berhalter was calling up. But I think we can agree that any coach replaced there, the 23-man roster, I think 18 players, almost 15 to 18. It's kind of like, yeah, these guys are kind of like, if healthy.
Well, but you say that anybody would be there and any coach would have brought them up. I mean, when it comes to Matt Turner, when it comes to, the dual nationals.
Turner was one of our best, the best American goalkeeper in MLS. With Andre Blake's not American, but at the time it was an option for sure.
Okay, but ultimately, if Pochettino comes and has somebody that we've never seen before or that has never been called in under his watch, I mean, that's obviously going to be, his move, and he's going to get an incredible amount of credit. And by the way, Greg Berhalter doesn't need credit. I just want I was just trying to point out, the perspective and the understanding of where these players have come from. Mm-hmm. And Greg Berhalter, to his credit, often talked about it in a 2-cycle type of way, even though he knew there's a good chance he might not be around for that second cycle. But he looked at this group that he was fostering as coming to fruition maybe in that second cycle. We don't like to hear that, and I didn't necessarily like to hear it because I was like, I don't care about 2026 right now. I want to do the things that make us good in 2022. But I think the way he looked at it was much more of a two-cycle type of situation.
No, yeah, for sure. And he got that second cycle, and we know how that ended up going. Yeah, he got a chance. Yeah.
Alexi, though, with them making a hire like that, and it's at home, and all this talent that Berhalter also had, they're going to be in their prime. Like what we've seen from Pulisic at Milan, which we'll talk about him in our final topic of the day in a minute. But what we've seen from Pulisic this year, playing well at Milan, we've seen Adams playing well at Bournemouth. We've seen all these players playing better. Even Pepe's been playing very well at PSV. What are the expectations having this World Cup at home? What is the bare minimum? Because, Filippo said 2 knockout round wins, right? That's what he has is the bare minimum. But is that enough? Like, should fans expect us to go to semifinal or a quarterfinal? Like, what are the expectations?
You should go to a quarterfinal. You should definitely go to a quarterfinal. Absolutely. But look, let's also be realistic. When I look at this team right now, we don't have a striker. Okay, we have strikers, but we don't have a striker. Nobody's yet, grabbed it with both hands. And I know there's injuries and people are in and out, but there's no real person. So while it does kind of pick itself, I think that there are question marks. There's a huge question mark, obviously, at striker, the center back position, and even Matt Turner right now. I think he is vulnerable, although I think he's the incumbent, and I think, coming in Nations League and going forward, he's going to start. But that could certainly change. So there are some opportunities, but there are also some glaring vacancies right now that you would think less than a year and a half away from the 2026 World Cup that it would be much more solidified. But, a lot can happen in the next year and a half.
So if, for example, Filippo had mentioned it's all about the draw, right? Who you play after the group stage, if you make it out of the group stage, has a lot to determine how far you can advance. But if we do lose, which I think would be the knockouts, like 32 now, right? The round of 32, that's what it would be. If they lost that game, even if they unfortunately did play Spain or Argentina or France, but it'd be a huge failure, right? That, like, even with that is a huge failure.
Doesn't matter who it is.
Doesn't matter, because if you top your group, you should be playing a weaker opponent. Because if you top your group and you play Spain, that means Spain didn't do well in the group stage. So if they lose there, to me, it's a failure, regardless of who we played. Now, of course, once you reach quarterfinals, even the second knockout, you could be facing like the best team in the tournament. That could happen. But the first knockout round, complete failure if we lose there.
But this is about beating the elites. I mean, ultimately, what are we doing here, right? We want to be the best in the world. In order to do that, you have to be able to consistently compete about the elites. And we can always kick the can down the road and say, all right, next World Cup, and we're happy here. At some point, we have to step up. This generation, and I've said this before, has been given so much, and I'm proud of it. I'm glad that they have so many opportunities that my generation never had. But with that comes, and should come, higher expectations. I know, Filippo, you talk about the Brazilian culture and the glass half empty as opposed to half full, and not in a negative way. We should expect more from Pochettino and this team in the summer of 2026 than any team that we have ever seen from a men's national team perspective. And we should demand more. And if and when they don't live up to all of the wonderful things that they have and the advantages that they have relative to previous generations, I'm going to be pissed. We should be pissed. And it will be a failure. I hope that doesn't happen. And I hope, especially, by the way, on the 250th birthday of the greatest country in the world, that in that summer, people see something special. and people that maybe don't even know about soccer are emotional and passionate and crying because they're celebrating their country through this sport. But it's up to Pochettino to make sure that they have that belief in themselves, and then that they go out there on the field and they do it. And if they don't, boom.
Well, it comes down to, like, we can't use the bracket. When I mentioned the bracket, I just said I don't want to give a prediction without it because I'm not seeing who we're playing or the path to try to make it realistic. But look at Morocco's bracket. They had arguably the toughest bracket in the World Cup. They had to go through that group that had what? Croatia, Germany. No, I can't remember right now. No, sorry, it was the Morocco was in which group? I think they were in Canada, whatever group. They were in a tough group, but they had to knock out Portugal and Spain in the 2 knockout rounds. The same Spain that went on to win the Euros last year, right? 2 years after. And they went through it and they made it to the semis and they put up a fight. So it doesn't really matter who we face there. We have to find a way to win. We're also the host nation. Usually host nations punch above their weight. We saw that with South Korea, whether the ref helped or not, they made it to the semifinals. We saw that with, I would argue, even Germany in 06. They kind of punched above their weight. That was not a great team. Russia, Brazil in 2014. I don't know what happened there, but we'll skip that one. But I mean, in Qatar, it wasn't really good. They try to put whatever team they could together, but usually they punch above their weight. Host nation. The U.S. in '94. No one expected the U.S. I wasn't like. I mean, you know better than myself at that time because I couldn't really follow the World Cup, but the U.S. was placed in a very tough group, right? If you look at the history of that World Cup leading into it, Colombia was seen as better than Brazil. They were seen as better than Argentina. So you're facing a title contender. It was what, Romania also that you played?
Romania and Switzerland, yeah. So
and Romania was a top team in Europe, and Switzerland is always Switzerland. They're never easy to beat. And then the U.S. gets out of the group, and they lose to Brazil just 1-0, the same Brazil that won the World Cup. So host nations usually tend to overperform. And we have a very good team here. Like, we can't lose in the first knockout round stage. It doesn't matter who we play.
Well, and not only
we're not Canada and Mexico, man. We're not Canada. They're the ones that could lose there. We're not Canada and Mexico.
And it's 48 teams, so we're not going to get a group of death. Ultimately, even though we're the host team and obviously we're placed at the top of the group, the 3 teams that we get, I'm telling you right now, we should beat them. And I think we will beat them. I think that we will do very well in the group. I think it will not be looked at as a group of death. I don't think that anybody's going to, worry about it. But to Filippo's point, yeah, it's difficult to judge where it's going to be because a pathway is important. But even without that, the expectations should be high. We're letting ourselves down as a soccer playing nation. And I think we're actually letting Pochettino and the team down if we don't have high expectations.
No, I agree. I think as you look at the 2014 team, that group of death, Germany, Portugal, Ghana. I mean, we're talking about prime Ronaldo as well, who chokes a lot, but we will say that for another day. We got out of that group when we had Beasler, Wondolowski was on the team. Sure. You talking about all of our stars, Dempsey, Bradley, Altidore, all of them were playing in MLS. We were able to make it out of that. So yes, expectations should be through the roof. We demand a performance that is respectable and memorable in 2026, especially hosting it here in the United States. Now, the final question I have for you guys to wrap it up, and I appreciate both of you joining me today, is about Pulisic being the best USMNT player of all time. Now, a lot of people think he already is. And I've talked to Alexi about this before. I think he thinks there needs to be more stuff as far as like added to the trophy cabinet or more memorable wins to be considered in that discussion. So we'll start with Filippo first on this one. Do you believe that Christian Pulisic is already the best U.S. men's national team player in history?
He is the best we've ever had, yeah. He's the best U.S. men's national team player we've ever had. Of course, if you start to go through accomplishments, I can also give many examples of players from other national teams that are less accomplished than others, but they're going to be placed higher than one another, right? That won this or won that. His numbers up to his age are very compatible to what Landon was. I think I did a whole video about that, and it's like very close. He's obviously ahead of Clint because Clint came into the scene a bit later, right? Like Pulisic and Landon at age 18 were already thriving. Clint, I think he started in MLS age 22, roughly, something like that. But no, in terms of like just pure quality of player, ability, talent, Christian Pulisic is the best player the U.S. men's national team's ever had. accomplishment-wise, it's not really debatable because, I mean, obviously, Landon has more goals, more assists, more accomplishments, honestly, more iconic moments too. But yes, Pulisic's the best player we ever had.
Landon's the best player, but I do think that Christian Pulisic, if he continues on this trajectory, and most importantly, has a international moment, obviously playing for the U.S., and were he to do it in a World Cup that happens in his own country, that would certainly do it for me. Because Landon has those moments when it comes to the international game and for the U.S. team. And while Christian certainly from a young age has had an influence on the U.S. men's national team, I still think he's missing that international aspect of it. Landon has statues. Landon has trophies named after him. Landon, from a American perspective, and this is what we're talking about, the best American player from a male perspective ever, has the influence on the game and the influence on the game at home relative to Major League Soccer. So all of those things combined, I think at this point right now, make Landon Donovan slightly ahead of Christian Pulisic. But again, if the trajectory continues this way and he does something for the national team that makes everybody remember, and it's an iconic type of moment, then I think he not only takes it, but then takes it and continues on and, ultimately has plenty of padding for the best player ever.
But are you then, you're putting it mainly based on like accomplishments then?
Accomplishments and influence, yes.
But what about if I asked you, ignoring both of their accomplishments, even because like if you go club level, Pulisic has done more, right, at a higher level, like winning the Champions League, actually playing is no joke, right?
Yeah, sure. But he also grew up in a different time, had different opportunities, better resources, more pathways. So you have to take that into account. All right.
Alexi, you're starting to sound like my grandfather did.
No, but and if you ask an average American who Landon Donovan is as opposed to Christian Pulisic, they're going to know Landon Donovan.
Might be true. It might be. It's tough to know. Like among kids, it's definitely Pulisic, right? If we go that, like kids and teenagers, because they're watching Milan. I see. I even coach kids here in Orlando, and they're to my surprise, they start wearing Milan jerseys with Pulisic in the back, and I was kind of happy to see that.
I love it.
I was very happy because usually I always see kids with like Messi, Mbappe, Neymar, and then I start to see kids with Milan, and that helps because Milan's such an iconic brand that I'm pretty sure their dads have watched the old Milan. They're like, oh, that team was fantastic, not the same as before. But if I asked you just in pure ability, like a player that is a better player, ignoring the accomplishments, do you have Pulisic or Landon?
Two different players, obviously. While they kind of take up the same position on that left-hand side, that off side type of thing, even though they're right-footed players, I think Landon's better in space. I think Christian is better at the one-on-one type of moment. But I do think when it comes to touch, Christian Pulisic is smoother and more, for lack of a better word, graceful in the way that he plays. But Landon was a little bit more like raw and jagged in the way that he went about it, and kind of like in your face. Christian is a little bit more melodic, I guess. If there's a
smooth, right?
Yeah, like, smooth, exactly. Yeah. I come back to smooth. You're right.
Yeah, I think that also with Landon, he was probably more direct.
Yes,
it was more like you go on counterattack, or we can use Greg Berhalter's favorite word, verticality, right? With Landon Donovan, very direct and deadly in transition. I just think that when it comes to a higher level, essentially, I think what you were trying to say is like Pulisic's better in tight spaces. You put him in tight spaces, he'll get out of it. While Landon, you need like that open field, and boom, he'll hit you in transition. I just think Pulisic is the best player we've ever had. Will he be the most accomplished? That only time will tell. I do think like he had people forget this. He had a really good 2022 World Cup. All our goal contributions came from him. All the goals came from him. And he's had some iconic moments with the U.S. against Mexico, more specifically. So did Landon, obviously.
Yeah, and the Algeria moment for Landon and these types of things. And sometimes it's relative to the moment, and, social media was coming through, and like all sorts of different things combined to make you iconic. Look, it could be hair. I'm just saying it could be a goatee. It could be any type of thing that happens that makes people notice and ultimately, gives you that iconic type of moment or that iconic type of image out there. And I think that, look, there's a great opportunity in the summer of 2026 for Christian Pulisic to kind of stamp for perpetuity who he is as a person and obviously who he is as a player. So again, it wouldn't surprise me in the least if he does
The
that.
reason I said you sounded like my grandfather was when you were talking about having better opportunities, because when you talk to, well, my grandfather already passed away, but when I used to talk to him about soccer, it's always about how Garrincha and Pele were better. And if they played today, they would destroy Messi because they would have more opportunities, better cleats, better ball, better field, better training. And I always tell them, like, I get the point, but then it goes back to your Landon Donovan point prior where he played in MLS and that was his potential. Maybe Pele, under those conditions, that was his peak. Like, he wouldn't have gotten better. That was his peak.
By the way, goalkeepers in the era that Pele played were also very, very different too.
They were worse. Yeah, goalkeeper. I think I even see this very often. It's the position that has evolved the most. They got better at their feet. They got bigger, more agile. Just goalkeepers, just from the 90s beyond, they just continue to develop more and more. It's kind of weird nowadays. You don't really even see many bad goalkeepers in like top leagues. Like, most goalkeepers are really good.
But on the other side of that, wouldn't you love to see Maradona play in the age of the protection of players right now? Because, I mean, back in the day, not only could you take swipes at him, but like, unless there was protruding bone, it was kind of play on.
I think Pele didn't have cards in the beginning of his career. There were no cards. Yeah.
So it's fun. I look, if you're a good player, I think you figure it out in whatever era you are born in. Good players are good players.
Well, before we end, one question here, since I got Alexi trapped here real quick, and we're not fighting each other anymore, right? We're done fighting.
No. Peacemaker.
94 World Cup too. What was the toughest player you had to mark?
So each of these teams that we played, like you mentioned, back then we had videotapes of what they were, and they all had really, really good players. Whether it was a Spria or Rincon when it comes to Colombia, and the list goes on and on and on. And then when I came up against Brazil, the Romario and Bebeto tandem, I mean, take your pick and pick your poison when it comes to it. The best player that I've ever played against, because I'm 6'3", and so for me, having the little guys, if you will, and the guys with the center of gravity where they're able to shift their weight, the low center of gravity, those are the ones that give me problems. So like the Zolas. So for me, the best player I ever played against was Romario, because he could just kill you in so many different ways. And he often did. And in that World Cup, him and Bebeto, what an incredible 1-2 punch there, because, he could take the ball, stand you up and blow past you. He was a power pack. So the physicalness of what he could do was amazing. Like I said, the shift of his weight was like a Barry Sanders or an Emmitt Smith when it comes to football, in that they could just get you to move so quickly, especially for a bigger guy like me. So I always say when I get asked that question, Romario, without a doubt.
Well, I appreciate both of you guys joining me again for another episode talking about the USMNT. Make sure you give Filippo a follow at Tactical Manager TV on YouTube and Twitter. And Alexi, make sure you give him a follow on Twitter and also watch his podcast, Alexi Lalas State of the Union podcast.
Hey, Will, can I just say something before we go to both of you guys?
Of course.
Look, I know that there is a wonderful thing happening in soccer. And for an old guy that's been around a long time, to see the things that you, Will, and you, Filippo, are doing when it comes to soccer. And obviously the technology is there for you to do it. It warms the cockles of my old redheaded American heart to see the discussion that you're having, to see the debate that you're having, to see the way that you are being inclusive of people that in the past maybe have just been shut out, or just haven't had the opportunity to hear their voice. I think it's vital. I think it's necessary. I love the fact that it's being done. The more people into the tent that we can get, the better. At times, like you said, we'll disagree. That's okay. That's part of life, and it's certainly part of soccer and something that we need more of when it comes to our game. But I'm wishing you both well in everything that you are doing, and I love the fact that you guys and so many other people out there, by the way, are doing it, because I think it's what's going to help propel our sport forward. And as we've talked about in our little chats here, the game of soccer is, changing dramatically both on and off the field when it comes to what's happening in the United States. And we're bobbing and weaving and we're punching and we have challenges when it comes to other soccer leagues that are around the world and other sports leagues that are even in our own country. But we're getting there day after day. And it's because of a lot of the work that you and a lot of your colleagues out there are doing. And sometimes for not a whole lot of attention, for not a whole lot of accolades out there, but you do it because you love to do it. And I like the fact that it is turning for some of you into a business and a vital business going forward. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I was gonna make a joke about a few journalists, but his speech was too beautiful, so I should not attack anyone.
We can't. We have to end it on that.
I can't. I was gonna make a joke, and I was gonna attack a few journalists out there, but it was like, no, this is a nice speech. You gotta end
take it from an old guy involved in media. Keep some powder dry, my friend. Don't worry.
Well, I appreciate both of you for coming on, and let us know what you thought about the episode. If you agree with Pulisic being the best player of all time, if he's not, what your expectations are for the 2026 MLS or 2026 World Cup for the USMNT. Until next time, guys, I will see you all soon.